Welcome back to the Afro Qi Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with a guest about a conversation I know a lot of you guys are going to be able to relate to. Our guest today is the owner of WorthyWell, a podcast and community that supports normalizing spiritual experiences in the physical realm and empowers you to become a more conscious participant in your spiritual journey. Our guest today is Shelby, an intuitive meditation and breathwork guide, energy healer, and spiritual guide who I am so happy to have the conversation about how we as Black women can navigate our spiritual journeys. So welcome to the Afro Qi Podcast, Shelby. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here and to have this conversation, one of the conversations I'm really passionate about. So
Yes.
looking forward to diving in.
I'm so excited. So I found Shelby on Instagram. I was just speaking with another guest how this year, well, I told my whole story about just my relationship with social media in general and how before starting my mental health private practice in 2015, I started. 2018, I really got out there, like seriously as a solopreneur. I did not have any personal social media accounts. So I'm like real new to the online streets. And then in 2020, when I started the podcast, I got more into social media and I've just, had my whole relationship with it because I felt like everybody was just so advanced. I was like, what's this button and what's that do? I was like the grandma trying to figure out social media. So this year, I feel like puts me like 2 or 3 years in the game of social media land. But I did a thing this year when I started to become very intentional about who I followed on social media and who I engage with. And in that intentional journey, I discovered you, Shelby. And what really stood out to me, first of all, I love your podcast and your conversations. You're welcome with my spiritual friends. Is that what my spiritual friends? I love that. So for me and my friend group, I'm like the spiritual friend. So that really caught my attention. And so when I wanted to have this conversation about spirituality, so I've shared with a lot of my listeners and a lot of people just know kind of my spiritual journey. I talk a lot about this, and just with the podcast in general, we always kind of rope things back to spirituality. It just ties very nicely with energy healing. So I said, I really feel like Shelby would be a beautiful guest to help navigate this conversation. And especially for Black women, I feel like a lot of us are coming into this part of our life and our journey when we're starting to question maybe some of the spiritual beliefs and religious beliefs of our upbringing. And we're really starting to figure things out for ourselves and delve into kind of what's calling us and what's leading us. So again, I thank you so much for being on today and having this conversation with me.
Thank you so much. I've had a very similar social media journey. So
really? Let me hear yours.
We have I'm not going to call it a love-hate relationship, but part of my spiritual journey to be like right in line with the conversation we're having anyway is, not necessarily feeling like I have to be in line with like what's expected or just the status quo in general. And for me, social media has been this, beautiful, opportunity for people, like you and I, to connect on, these like-minded topics. And then everything has the light and the dark. And so one question I've been asking myself is, what do I want to see more of? And how can I bring that into the space? And also considering the fact that, there's so much life happening outside of Instagram and TikTok and, all the platforms as well. And so I've been, wanting to be intentional about, I guess, focusing more on how my life feels in like the real, world off of, social media.
Mm-hmm.
And when I feel called to share, I will. But yeah, I think for me, it really is about like how is life really?
Yeah,
You know what I
really.
mean? How is life really? So yeah, it's been an interesting thing to navigate, and like, paying attention to programming and, comparison and all the things, and
Mm-hmm.
really narrowing down like what your intention is around using it.
I love it.
So yes.
Awesome.
And let me say, I have listened to your podcast, and
Oh, lovely.
I just want to say, yeah, your podcast is so beautiful and so needed. And so thank you for creating this space and for, again, inviting me into it. So thank you for doing this.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
All right. So let's roll into this. So I really want to open up with kind of talking about what spirituality is. I think when a lot of people probably see the title of this episode, it's going to draw their attention. And I just know there's a lot of conversation around like, what is spirituality? Is it religion? And I ask this because I'm a Reiki master healer. And typically when people feel a calling towards Reiki, that's kind of like the first thing, like, and what religion is that? Like, is this not religion? It's like, I feel like when we talk about spirituality, or when we talk about healing, or we talk about consciousness, it's like when we have these conversations, immediately it goes to religion. Like, okay, and what religion is that? It's like we try to put it inside of some type of box or make it make sense in the realm of our thinking. So I really want to open up this conversation with talking about like just what is spirituality, your definition. How do you define spirituality, and especially like versus religion? Because I feel like that's such a hot topic.
Yeah, I definitely see. It's such a good question. It's also a big question.
I know.
So it's, obviously going to be, very individual. But to me, spirituality is an umbrella. Like if we imagine an umbrella, and then all of the religions are under this umbrella of spirituality. So I see spirituality as our constant expanding consciousness to who we are in relation to all that is. And that's such a big, broad definition, but who we are in relation to ourselves, who we are in relation to God, who we are in relation to one another. And for me, that expanding consciousness is coming more and more into awareness that we're all it's all connected as one big thing, connected through love, and I see religion as the context, through which we experience that consciousness, and so growing up, my context was, Southern Baptist. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and went to church every Sunday. Was very involved in, shout out to Riverview Baptist Church in Richmond, Richmond, Virginia. But that was my context, and it laid a really beautiful foundation for me in my spiritual journey. But I do see spirituality as really just like the umbrella of all, not just even religion, but the umbrella over which everything resides,
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of growing up, your upbringing being in the Southern Baptist Church. How would you describe your journey into discovering your spirituality, like your spiritual journey? What did that look like?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I'll try to give you the short version.
Okay. I mean, we got time.
So it's interesting because I always felt very connected, like emotionally connected to to just the stories, that were told, in Sunday school. Sometimes I would tear up, when I would hear some of the stories about Jesus, and I was like this little kid, like tearing up. I had no idea why I was tearing up. I was just like, why am I tearing up right now about the story about Jesus? And I don't know, I just always had this like emotional response to, because, as I'm sure, many of your listeners can, potentially relate to, a lot of the stories in the Bible are very deeply moving stories, especially the ones about Jesus. But to, at that young age, be so like moved by it was just unexplainable to me, but it happened often. And I don't know if I necessarily connect that to the religion itself, but I think it was more so just a connection to spirit, just feeling spirit, whenever those stories were, evoked in a space, that I was in. I just felt it. And so I was conscious of that connection. But on the other side of things, I also knew that I like had a vision of my grandmother after she passed, when I was a toddler, and not even necessarily having the language to, I guess, express with how that tied in, to things. But it actually, and I don't think I've really talked about this much, but my spiritual journey, the gateway to my broadening spiritual journey, was through my own self-healing, which actually started physically.
Wow.
I started like breaking out, having issues with my menstrual cycle, and, started like, increasingly giving like, just very like medical based things side eye, and just based on how I reacted to certain things. And I became this very curious, like I was like, the Googler. But a lot of the things that were coming up for me physically, I ended up, seeking, I went off the beaten path, for ways to support myself. And once I healed myself through this curiosity and just different things I learned, which related to like just diet and, natural remedies for different things, I just started questioning everything. I was just like, oh, wow, did I just really do that? And so from there, it just deepened my curiosity about everything, in life. And as I'm sure like the, connection between the spiritual connection between what we put in our bodies and how that shows up in so many other ways, in our lives. So that was actually kind of the gateway or the opening for me to become this, deep seeker, reading all kinds of different books and just researching different things. And it's what led me to meditation as well, which I'm sure you can imagine just opened up, a whole other, spiritual experience, And I always tell people, like, you can start meditating for different reasons, but if you do it consistently for long enough, you are bound to have a spiritual experience, it never fails. And so the physical things and the self-healing led me to meditation. Meditation led me to just open my world, open my intuition, and led me to it literally just like unfolded, and expanded from there. So
I do want to ask you this, because this is standing out to me, especially when you were talking about your journey growing up. And this is bringing me back to a question that I have personally been asked probably on numerous occasions, of like this choice of being spiritual or religious. It's like there's an or. Like, what is your take on that? Like, do you feel there has to be a or? Like, I almost feel like
Mm-hmm.
those who may more so identify as religious almost turn their nose up at those who may say, oh, well, I'm spiritual. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
is your thought on that? Your take on that? Like, just this choosing, like, I gotta be or,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah, I think it's a totally, if you, not but if
Yes.
someone, yeah, if someone is, depending on where you are in your spiritual journey, a person might have they might be oriented to this like either or mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just based on like where a person might be. One
Mm-hmm.
thing that I like to say, because everything is just so, has been opened up for me so much over time, is that whether you consider yourself to be spiritual or not, you are a spiritual being. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you are impacted by all kinds of things that you probably wouldn't claim, but
Yeah.
whether you know it or not, like you are a spiritual being having a human experience, and you are, you know, being influenced by the moon and the stars and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, spirit and just so many things happening, whether you claim it or own it, you know, or not. And so I do think that, so I definitely don't think that there's an either or, obviously.
Okay.
And I think that, you know, religion can be a beautiful complement to the spiritual journey. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think you have to be religious to be spiritual, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And I also believe that the spiritual journey is very, very much unique to each individual.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually talked about this on a recent episode where Koya Webb made this point very beautifully, just about how individual, you know, this journey is. And there's literally no right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, you can mash up, you know, what you love about different religions. You can create your own, you know, practices and rituals that support you on your journey and combine that with some, you know, things and you know, different religions. It literally is whatever moves you. And I think it benefits us to remove a lot of those boxes and compartments so that we give ourselves permission to be drawn to whatever is calling us rather than
Mm.
trying to stay in this like box, you know, because
I
there's so
love
much
that.
there, you know.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. It's bringing me to I practice African spirituality, and I had a recent initiation, and throughout that initiation process, there was a reading. And in that reading, it came out that, and I wasn't surprised. So when it came out, I was like, oh, that makes sense. So it came out that I have some sort of, and it hasn't shown fully what it is, who it is, but I'm getting to know it. But it was delivered to me that there is some type of Asian guardian angel that I have, like some type of Asian deity that is really supporting me,
That's
which makes
beautiful.
perfect sense because I've always been drawn to Reiki. I'm a Reiki master, which we know that is of Asian culture. And then I'm totally into the I Ching, and I do I Ching divination. So I'm like,
That makes so much sense.
duh, like, oh my gosh, like, so yeah, and it came out there. So I love hearing you say, like, you know, just being open to what you're guided towards. Like, I've just naturally just been guided towards, I mean, both African as well, but also some Asian based
Yeah.
practices. And I had a Reiki master teacher training this weekend as well. And that's something that I mentioned to my students is after this initiation, after this training, just see how much you're going to be open. Like, don't let this be it. Like, open yourself up continually to things that are just kind of naturally being drawn to you. So I think that's really beautiful that you said that. And I think sometimes in the process of the spiritual journey, sometimes things are magnetized towards us. And I think sometimes when it's not familiar, or it's not something we're used to, or it's not something that grandmama used to do, or, you know, big mama and them used to do, so we think, but anyways, that's a conversation for another podcast. We can sometimes shy away from it, but that could be the thing that is being magnetized towards us for us to incorporate in our healing journey. So I do want to talk a little bit about that, just navigating the spiritual journey, especially when you're starting to engage in things and things are starting to become interesting to you that might look a little different than how you grew up, or, you know, maybe, you know, what your friends and things are doing, because I hear that and I see that happen a lot in the spiritual journey. I see people, a lot of folks, almost kind of hide and bury their spiritual practices or the things that they're really interested in, with fear of being criticized and judged and, you know, talked about. So I do want to talk a little bit about that, just ways to navigate this spiritual journey when it looks a little different from what everybody else in our environment are engaged in.
Yeah, I love that question so much. And it's one of the, you know, as you mentioned earlier, one of the main reasons I started WorthyWell was because I wanted to help normalize these experiences. Because when we normalize them, we feel deeper permission to lean into them. And that only, you know, helps us all grow and helps us grow as a collective. And so, yeah, I love that question. And I think for those who feel like they have to hide or don't feel comfortable being open about some of their spiritual practices, it is for you. You know, it is for you. It's not something you necessarily need to, you know, shout from the mountaintops, but just know that you are the more you lean into what you feel called to, the better off you will be. And that typically, from what I've seen and what I know has happened in my own journey, is it trickles out. It trickles out, you know, almost like if you can picture a drop of water into a lake, you know, and that ripple, you know, that happens, like you tuning into your journey unapologetically, you showing up, you know, fully in who you are, it only creates ripple effects throughout the rest of your life. That ripple effect oftentimes will, you know, help others to deepen their own, you know, spiritual journeys. And sometimes it'll also, you know, help certain people float further away, you know, from you, who may not be serving you in your journey. And so I think it's
that
like,
part.
Yeah, it happens, you know, and sometimes it's temporary, sometimes it's, you know, a more permanent thing, but a big piece of it is just trusting that all that is happening is for your good, you know, and for your use and for everybody else's use for that matter. So that's what I would say specifically to those who feel like they may need to hide their journey. Another thing that comes up, and I'm guilty of this as well, once you get to a certain point in your journey, you might start judging people a little bit, you know, you might start judging people, and it's not even like out of, you know, it's not like looking down on anyone. But what I've found is it's an opportunity, it's a mirror, you know, for you to look back at yourself and say, oh, why am I, you know, looking at them that way? Or why am I, you know, why do I have this judgment around what they are doing? What is that showing me about me? Because it's, you know, you can always bring it back to you, you know? So that's one thing I would look out for, because I know that, you know, as certain things become true to you, and that truth evolves, throughout your
It
journey, but
does.
as certain things become true to you, you're not going to be able to unsee, certain things happening around you. But what you can do instead is witness it with love.
Mm.
And that is literally like the opportunity there, when you are perceiving things around you, knowing what you know now as, oh, I don't like that, or, oh, just perceiving it with love, and I think that's another, important thing to remember, and let other people be on their journey. Don't try
Mm.
to fix anyone, or you can
Yes.
share, and like I said before, like be a model to you know be a model of how you approach your own spirituality, and let people in your life witness that,
Mm-hmm.
but let everybody have their own journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. I think I can attest to that. I'll call myself out on that.
We
And I
all
know
do
for
it.
me, I
Yeah.
think it was excitement. Like, look at this. Like, it's like, don't you want to do this? Like, it's like, you don't. Like, how could you not want to meditate? Like, what do you
Yeah,
mean? It's
yeah,
blissful. And it's like, all right,
yeah.
everybody is on the, I mean, even for me, even with my husband, I mean, he's on his own journey now, but for a
Mhm.
moment, I was on this road alone and I had to
Mhm,
keep on
mhm,
trucking. And,
mhm.
I won't say eventually, but in his own time, just like how you said, leading and being the model, it was kind of like, wow, look at this journey she's on. Wow.
Mhm.
I'm witnessing my wife's transformation. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. This isn't the woman I met in college. This isn't the lady I married. Like, okay, can I get some of that? And it's
Yeah.
like eventually he came around and his journey looks totally different from mine, but
Mhm.
it wasn't pushy. It was just, I'm just living my life. I'm just on my journey and he's just
Yeah.
here observing, So
Yeah. I love
definitely,
that.
because when I was trying to beat him over the head with it, he was like, nope, not doing it. But once I kind of left it alone, I was like, okay, touche, to each
Yeah.
their own.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. It's a beautiful thing when that
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. And another beautiful part of that is not being judged, right? Because that can
Yeah.
sometimes come out too when you're on your own spiritual
Mhm.
journey, when it doesn't look familiar to those around you, others can judge you. So I always thank my husband for never judging me, never demonizing me,
Mhm.
just like, oh, that's my
Mhm.
wife. That's just what she be up. Like he just kind of let
Yeah.
me do my
Yeah.
thing. Like, oh, there she go doing that thing again. Like just kind of let her be. And then his own
Mhm.
curiosity kind of
Yeah.
sparked. But I'm blessed for that because I know that's not everybody's story.
Yes.
And I've
Mhm.
heard stories of, families not supporting and,
Mhm.
speaking and judging. So I do want to kind of wrap up there, especially for the women that are evolving
Mhm.
and that are stepping out and maybe doing things that aren't normal within their families and they're feeling
Yeah.
that judgment and they don't want to hide it. They want to be open about who they are and what they're exploring. Can you talk to us a little bit as we wrap up? How can we navigate that? Just like the judgments of
Mhm.
others. And I see this a lot in Black families,
Mhm.
once you kind of go against the grain, it's like, well, what are you doing? Like it's,
Mhm.
I remember, now that I think about this, I don't think I've ever told this story. Okay. So this is coming to me. So I'm going to share it. I remember
Mhm.
me and my husband, we purchased a home. We purchased our second home together.
Mhm.
And I was so happy because I finally had a basement, and in the basement was like this room I could have all to myself. So he had like the basement for his man cave, and I had like the back room for like my thing. And I
Mhm.
deemed this office like my spiritual room. This is
Mhm.
a true story. I deemed it my spiritual room. And I remember getting a bookshelf and getting my sage and my crystals. Like I had my whole little thing set up, and I purchased a Buddha. And I had this Buddha at the top of my bookshelf, and it was like in front of my meditation corner. And my aunt had came by, we buy a house, people want to come by, whatever, and see. So she came by and she, went down to the basement, and immediately when she walked in, this is my first time telling this story, and I would not forget it. She walked in and she saw the Buddha, and she was just like, what is that? Like, what are you doing? Like, and she ripped me to shreds. She probably cited every Bible verse that could come to her mind, ones that made sense, ones that weren't even related.
Worshiping false idols.
Oh my, it was this whole thing. Shelby, this is no lie. At that point, I took everything down, and my beautiful spiritual room was locked away in a closet. And I would go in this closet. I feel like I could cry right now. I would go in this closet because it was a walk-in closet. Like, you could go inside of it, and I would go in that closet and have my time, because I didn't want to be judged. Now you come in my house, or you gonna see it all, because I don't give a damn. Like, this, you up in my space. But I was young then. I was young in my marriage, really, young in my journey. Like, and again, I just had these, things I was just drawn to, like. And I would just feed, whatever I felt coming to me. And I did not come out of that closet until I left that home.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And I know I'm not the only one that has experienced that, just, hell, I even hear people saying they can't even, light a smudge stick in front of certain, and it's just like, and it's just like, I'm curious to know your take on how we as Black women can navigate that when we have family members that might be demonizing us or talking bad about us. And because I'm quite sure that conversation left my house and went to other families. How we do in the Black family. They tell that auntie tell this one, look here over there, she over there devil worshiping. Like, who knows what they thought, right? Like, oh my God. Now in this stage of my journey, I don't care. But at that point, that was, my daughter is 5, and we wasn't even thinking about having her. So that was years ago. So I'm interested in hearing, like, what would you say is a way, and I want to kind of wrap up there, like, how do we navigate that? Because I want people to come out the closet. Like, that was in my own home, Shelby, that I paid for. I'm paying a mortgage on a home, and I'm sitting in a closet in my house. Because I'm afraid of what guests of my home are going to say about me. Like, the audacity of me. They didn't leave a collection plate to contribute to my mortgage. I got to pay that on my own to sit in a closet.
Yeah.
So I had to get that out.
That's such an important story. I'm so glad you told that, because it's such a real scenario, and I'm sure so many people can relate to that. So many people. One thing that a few things. One thing that I think is super important is listening for community within your family. Not everyone may have this, but I know for me, I call her my sister cousin because we're cousins, but we're like sisters. So she, for me, we were kind of that to one another. We still are. And we had, very similar approaches to spirituality. And so we would connect about that and talk about that. And it was this safe space between us, to connect, and even talk about, aspects of our lineage, tied to what we were both learning and experiencing. And so I think, if there is, and the reason I say listen for community is it can be easy to be, very self-protective, and especially if things like that have already happened, but you may be surprised, sometimes if you kind of, keep your ears open, keep your intuition open to what you hear and see, throughout your family, especially when you're at gatherings and things like that. Who seems more open, who seems like they, maybe, experiencing something new and different.
Mm-hmm.
When I deepened into my journey, I started kind of going out on a limb. And, although I'm deeply intuitive, I would just bring it up with people. And I remember one day I was talking with a friend who had recently, her mother had recently transitioned, and I just felt called to talk with her about, what the other side of that, and we had never had a conversation like that before, but it just felt right. So I would say, follow your intuition. If you can move beyond the fear and pay attention, I think that's important. And if you don't have that community within your family, I would also recommend joining a community, outside of that. And that could be, an online community, anywhere where you can commune with like-minded people who are on a similar journey. And I know for me, that was Black Girl and Own, the circle for a long time. And I know so many Black women who got there, who were just so expanded, by that community and learning more about their spirituality, so I would say seek outside community as well. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is be curious, because even if your family members are, judgmental or, don't understand what you're into, it might be worth asking some questions about, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents. One question that I felt called to ask my parents, I want to say maybe like a year ago now, was whether there was anyone in our family who identified as a healer, even though we're all healers, ourselves, but if there was anyone in our family who identified that way. And I ended up learning about my Uncle Little George back in Jackson, Mississippi, who was like the neighborhood healer, and everyone would, especially in a neighborhood, in a place like Jackson, Mississippi, where a lot of, Black residents didn't have access to healthcare. He, from what I gather, practiced a lot of African, spirituality rituals, and people would come to him for all kinds of different things, and so that was really beautiful to learn about. It doesn't mean my parents are out here healing people, but they were able to share that story with me, and that was another beautiful way to feel seen. I felt seen by my great uncle, not even having met him, so asking questions, about people in your lineage, I think, is another way to feel seen. Even if they're not here in the physical, those stories can be passed on to you in a whole another way. So
I love that. Now I'm about to call some folks because I need to ask some questions. No, that's really, really, really a good one. I don't think I've ever asked those questions before.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 39, and that was the first time I ever asked. So.
Like, who in our family identified as a healer? Because there has to be someone.
I think it's so innate in our in every culture, really, but in our culture, like, it's so innate in us, and I just feel like along the way there had to be, people who were more expressive in that identity,
You really got me over here thinking. I'm gonna make some phone calls, because like you said, it's innate. Like, my thing is, I wonder if they would remember, if they will recall. I'm gonna have to call like some great aunts probably.
Yeah.
And do some digging.
Yeah, and especially the older generation in our families, it may be something that they're just like, oh my God, I'm so glad you asked me about this. I never, like, no one asks, and just having the opportunity to talk about something that is part of your lineage, but like no one ever asks. It's just not something that's talked about, you know?
Yeah. And I can see that. I can see that. Well, Shelby, this was such a beautiful conversation. I intuitively know that there are listeners like just taking deep breaths right now. That there are women that feel seen, like, yes, that's me. That feel seen, and most of all, that feel comforted in knowing that they aren't the only ones. And one last piece I really want to point out that you mentioned was listening. Because there could be other people right there in your family that are on their own journeys, but maybe aren't sharing as well. And I won't share my cousin's journey. That's her journey to share, but I will share that we have been on the same journey. And it's so wild. We were actually talking, and it's so wild because we grew up together, like spending the night over each other's houses. Like we grew up together. And I would say probably like around that college time, we distanced, not because, not for any reason. It's just, we just kind of grew up and, we went to separate places. And now that we're in our adult stage of life, we're starting to come together. She actually called me out, like, here, like, what you up to? And like, you see me? And I'm like, I see you too. And so then we hopped on the phone. We like, we see each other. Yes. So then we just started talking like, girl, I'm doing that. And girl, and so now it's like, we're back like this, like,
I love it.
And that's, we're there for each other. I mean, because we're in the same family. So she was, was able to share her journey, and then, how the family responded to her. And I'm like, girl, I'm on that journey too. And like, so it's like, we're able to hold each other in such beautiful space. So I am so grateful for her. She took the journey before me, so she able to kind of show me the ropes. Like,
yes,
this is kind of the thing. And now that I'm within my journey and very outward about it, because like I said, at this point of the journey, on this end of the path, I care less. And now I'm starting to see like younger cousins and those, and now they're asking me the questions. I'm like, oh man, like, now I'm the one in the family that's kind of showing the way a little bit, so I'm like, all right. So now I'm getting, the younger, like the 18s, the 16s, and stuff. They're like, oh, what is that? And they're so cute. And that generation they're very, very curious. Like,
they're so tapped in. Yeah.
I wish I had that courage at that age to just be wanting to explore. So yeah, I really love that listening, because you'll be surprised.
Yeah. Yeah. I love watching, younger generations come in just, already so curious and just so expanded. And I think it speaks to the consciousness expanding. Like, we are expanded at this time, and those who are, born after us, like, I think every generation is just going to be going to start more and more expanded, in their human expression and their life. So it's been really beautiful to see that, and they have you to
I know. So I'm thinking of my daughter. She's 5, and she's just, man, she's just all in it. Like, I had a friend that came over to visit from Texas, and she was telling, she was sitting by the pool. She was like, can I teach you how to meditate? And I'm just like,
oh, that's so sweet.
Can I teach you how to meditate? So she's just but she's also like my mini me. And the thing about, and this is a whole nother conversation for another recording, but I don't hide anything from her. So she's been with me. I mean, just even the birthing process was all a part of my spiritual journey. Probably the first person in my family before like ancestors to like have a natural birth. And I remember everybody in my family thought I was crazy. Like, that's beautiful. A natural birth, like, what? Because it just wasn't a part of the conversation. I remember even having those conversations with my family, like, just around even my mom, because she was in the birthing room, I'm like, don't say contractions. We don't say pain. We say birthing waves. We say pressure. Like I went through hypno baby. So my husband hypnotized me through my whole labor, which was 4 days.
Wow.
So even like that, like, so like long ago, they were like, yeah, Kiara a little different. We don't know. So my family now, they just go like this, like, child, she over there doing that stuff again.
Yeah, but when they get home, they're like on Google, like, let me see if I can get some of that.
I'm sure. Okay, so I feel like I could talk to you forever and ever. Well, Shelby, thank you so much again for coming on the Afro Qi Podcast and really talking with us about how we can navigate through our spiritual journey. So I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Of course, it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And if folks want to, stay connected, you can follow me on Instagram at Shelby Renee Giles, and you can check out WorthyWell at worthywell.co. And yes, I'm so glad we got to do this. And I look forward to staying connected.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shelby.
Thank you. Bye-bye.